Hi, is he there? Rod Fleming in the Philippines here. Now, there's been a lot of chat recently about young transitioners. That is, children, basically, either transitioning or allegedly being transitioned. Now, the first thing I want to make clear before we launch into this discussion is that any case where parents are encouraging children to develop as the opposite sex is likely to be child abuse. Any case where parents are bringing their children up as so-called gender neutral, that's likely to be child abuse. Okay? You need to give children signals as to what they should be. You need to support them as they navigate their path towards maturity, which includes sexual and gender maturity. But, and it's a big but, some children will start to give off signs very early in life that they don't want to know this, that they're against it, that it conflicts with their inner sense of being. And that inner sense of being is actually their developing sexuality. Okay? Gender is not linked to sex. It is linked to sexuality. In most cases, there is a coincidental match, but the link is not with sex, it's with sexuality. So what happens is, as the child's sexuality and sexualized awareness of him or herself develops, they begin to understand themselves as being not what you're telling them they are. Okay? So the little boy says, "No, Mum, I'm a girl." And he puts a t-shirt on his head to be that, look, see, this is my long hair, you know? And he wants to put on makeup, and he wants to, you know, join beauty pageants and all the rest of it. Now, the first thing to understand, and this confuses a lot of parents are very, very upset about this. And they don't need to be, to start with. The first thing to understand is that being transsexual is not a bad thing. It's fine. This idea that being transsexual is bad is part of the West's absolute shocking levels of transphobia. There's nothing wrong with being transsexual. I know plenty of them. And they're happy, well-adjusted people. Some of them have got great jobs, some of them don't. But how's that different from anybody else? Some of them have great relationships, some of them don't. How's that different from other people? There's no way that you can argue that being transsexual is a worse outcome than being sex-conforming homosexual. And I know some people will say, oh my God, surgeries. Well, look, let's be quite honest. Over 95% of the world's transsexuals do not have surgery. They're intact. They're still walking around with their penises on. And that's the fact. There have been surveys. It's very hard to get information, but there have been surveys, and those that in places like Thailand, you know, where there's a lot of post-ops, and even there, it's a tiny, tiny fraction, well under 5% of the total number of transsexuals. Most transsexuals are either pre-op or non-op. They don't ever want to have the operation, right? They just don't want it. So that whole argument about the surgery, at least for male to feminine, is completely bogus. It's a straw man, because most people don't do it. If you're trying to encourage young people to have surgery, which they may not otherwise want, then that's abusive. That's bad therapy. You shouldn't be doing that. It's up to them to make the decision, to come to that decision with themselves. And certainly, secondly, again, looking at male to feminine, and we'll discuss female to masculine, it's slightly different. In male to feminine, what we propose to do is that when puberty starts to come on, I'll explain my position philosophically in a minute, then we will stop the male puberty and give time for the young people and the young person and the people around her to adapt to the situation, to consider their options. And then at around about 13 or 14, if we're still looking at a convinced transitioner, you know, a real transsexual, estrogen. Give her the estrogen and the T blockers and start her full transition. I know an awful lot of transsexuals, and it's quite clear that the most successful transitions occur when the person starts their hormones in early teenage, really 12, 13, 14, about then. And these individuals are just so convincing as women, and they pass. They just pass, and they're delightful. They're lovely people. They're not conflicted because, they didn't have their psyches destroyed by some damned shrink trying to persuade them that they should live in harmony with their bodies, when actually what they'd want to do is live in harmony with their minds, and that's what we all do. I mean, there is no point in psychology other than to let you live in harmony with your mind. The idea that psychologists should be around there, getting people to conform to society's ideas of what they should be, that's not good practice. That's wrong, and they shouldn't be doing it. The purpose of any intervention must be to get that person to live in accordance with and comfortably with themselves. So, going back to the children, we've now discovered what we're going to do. We're going to get them on their hormones by the time this is boys, male to feminine, by the time they're 13, 14, and then when they get around about 18 or so, and, if you've got effective hormonal therapy in place, then you can wait a long time. You don't have to do it. There's no rush here, because all of the things that would cause a problem are being held at bay. The boy's not masculinizing. He's staying feminine. Like I say, most transsexuals don't have surgery. And you can go around here, and some of the most feminine women are around here, and I don't mean false feminine, I mean really feminine, they've got a cock between their legs. And the reason is they've been taking blockers, taking hormones which effectively block their testosterone since they were 12. So they never matured into men, rather. So you can wait. You can wait till the age of 20, 25. It's not a problem. You can give the person plenty time to come to terms with themselves and say, look, is GRS something I really want to do? And that way, the pressure's off. The pressure's off the parents, and the pressure's off the individual. A great deal of the problem in the West occurs because of this surgery express strain, which is like, we'll get you on the hormones, and then necessarily we'll give you the surgery. You don't need the surgery. Most trans women do not have it. It's the society they live in, the culture that they live in, that expects them to have this. And that's wrong. Shouldn't happen. These are expectations which society should not have. So, I personally have always, for many years now, certainly since about 2012, I guess, adopted a position that is today called supportive wait and see, or watchful wait and see. And basically what we say is, look, just let them do what they want. If you're talking about kids, right, just let them do what they want. Don't make a fuss about it. If your 3-year-old son wants to try wearing a dress, let him wear a dress. If he wants to try putting on makeup, let him put on makeup. If he wants to paint his fingernails, let him paint his fingernails. Do not make a big fuss out of it. Don't say, oh, you must be a girl. Oh, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll get you this, we'll get you that. And at the same time, don't say, oh, boys can't do that. Just chill. Because what the child is almost certainly doing is exploring his own, we're talking about boys here, his own psyche. What am I? Am I a boy or am I a girl? What does it mean to be a boy? What does it mean to be a girl? That which I'm not. By defining that which I am not, I can help to define what I am. A certain child I know very well, at one point, after a year of being Peter Pan, decided he wanted to be Wendy. Bought a pink dress, wore flower in his hair for about 6 months, and then went, I've had enough of that. It's boring. I'm King Arthur now. And that's what happens, You just mustn't get into a big tizzy about it. It's just something that kids go through. And for most children, the best thing you can possibly do is say, yes, dear, can I help you with your dress? Seriously, that's all you have to do. And if you treat them in that kind of loving, supportive way, most times they'll just come away from it. They'll just come away from it. But in a number of cases, and we don't really know what the number would be, in a situation where there was not massive peer, parental, teacher and psychological pressure on the individuals, because all of the studies that are quoted by people like whoever that are studied, these are all studies of people who've been subjected to relentless psychological pressure by shrinks like Zucker. And it's like, how can you possibly use them as a baseline? Come to the Philippines and where you find that the little boys who dress up as girls, and they start doing it at the age of 5 here, by the way, they're not being subjected to psychological interference. So you should be doing your studying here, because here there's not the same, you're free of these ideas. The society here doesn't actually care very much about, we call them backlas in this region, but there's many different names across the whole of Southeast Asia, whole of Asia generally, many different names across the whole of Southeast Asia, most commonly translated by the common word ladyboy, and ladyboy actually is really accurate in terms of what it means if you think about the conceptual side of it, because what they are, they see themselves as women, but they're born in boys' bodies, so they're ladyboys. And they don't see that as at all offensive. They see that, there are words that, if you say bakla, for example, in a particular way, it's very, very offensive. The same is true of katoi. Don't call them katois, call them ladyboys. They prefer it. But the point is that the society doesn't really care. If you grow up as a bakla, then there's still a role for you. There's still things that you can do. There are life paths that you can succeed in, that you can be very successful in, actually. I mean, probably the wealthiest person on Filipino television at the moment, and certainly one of the best known, is Vice Ganda, a very, very obvious bakla. And former beauty queen, comedian, tremendously talented person, a ladyboy woman. And that didn't hold her back being bakla. I mean, come on. This is a seriously wealthy person who's a major television star, makes and produces films, has business interests all over the country. No, you can't. There's simply no way that you can say, no, being a bakla means that you're going to fail, because it doesn't. So in this culture, it's very hands-off. It's very like, okay, fine. The wee boy wants to try being a girl, well, that's fine. Now, his dad might be really annoyed about that, because men invest heavily here in masculinity in children. But here's the thing. Men are not the authority in Filipino homes. Women are. The mum is in charge. Now, the man might get angry and he might start hitting things. He might cause a lot of trouble. But at the end of the day, mothers have a tremendous amount of power in Filipino culture. And if mum says, no, leave him alone, it certainly does make things easier. I'm not saying it's perfect. I mean, I've certainly met baklas who've had bad times. But the culture here is, by and large, much more accepting of the status of being, either bakla or tomboy than is the case in the West. In the West, everything has to conform. If you're, it's almost like, oh, these days it's all right to be homo, but don't be trans. For goodness sake, don't be trans. Don't do that. And that's just as ridiculous as it was 50 years ago when people say, I can't be homo, I can't have that. It's all complete crap. These expressions of non-conformity have been around, for instance, time immemorial. I mean, we have 35,000-year-old burial sites that have trans women in them, for goodness sake. It's a nonsense to suggest that this is some sort of thing that's just arrived. So to get back to the kids. What that means is that in a society that is mature about these things will not have a problem. And my argument is that parents should simply say, look, hands off. We're going to watch and wait and see. Observe what's happening. Now, if your child decides that Wendy is a 6-month experience and then moves on, then just write a note about it to yourself and forget it. That's it. It's not going to happen. It's finished with. It's done with. A child may not even remember it in later life. If it happens earlier on, they probably won't. If it persists, though, if it's persistent and insistent, and the expression is consistent, this thing, persistency, insistency, consistency, it's very, very important. The first one, persistency, is it just keeps happening. It's not like next term we go and we're back to being a boy when we go to school. It's next term, I want to see all my girlfriends and look at my lovely long hair. And this just gets more and more so all the time. And the consistency is that it's not moving from one idealized self-perception to another. The person has, sorry, a bit of paint on my hand, has a kind of, it's not fixed, but a developing self-identity, and it's always the same person. They're just growing up. So it's very consistent. And insistent is the idea that they get really, agitated about it. If you contravene their ability to express themselves in the gender that they identify as, they'll get like, no mum, I can't do that. No mum, you can't make me do that. I can't wear that. I'm a girl. And as they get older, they'll get more so, because as children get older, they'll tend to at least be able to make their feelings known more strongly. The thing that you must always bear in mind, and unfortunately this has been completely disregarded by certain professionals. I mean, I don't mind saying, I think Ken Zucker might have considered himself to be well-meaning, but he was a monster in practice. The people we're talking about, particularly the boys, are extremely agreeable. I mean, remember, they're sexually inverted, right? So they have many of the characteristics normally found in women, right? So women are known to be significantly more agreeable, in terms of psychological traits, than men are. And so are backlads. So are young male sex non-conforming boys, who we might call them pre-transsexuals, if you like. Ken Zucker was fond of the term pre-homosexual, which a lot of people didn't like, but I think we can use the term pre-transsexual here. These pre-transsexual boys, these trans kids, they're very, very biddable, they're agreeable, they want to please the adults around them. And this has allowed people to shockingly abuse them, and to really cause severe mental trauma in these individuals, because I'll do another piece on it, but if you go and look at the kind of techniques that people like Zucker were promoting that should be used on boys like this, I mean, it's really shocking. It's a real eye opener to read them, and you get them from his own quotes. There's no danger of misrepresenting or defaming this man, because he was very proud about and made no bones about the way that he treated these boys, and it was appalling. It was just appalling. Wait, there's a dog barking outside. So anyway, the parent has to be very careful not to fall into that trap. You have to not push, because you don't want a non-pre-transsexual to suddenly think they are transsexual and then at the age of 15 go, oh my God, what I do. At the same time, you don't want someone who genuinely is pre-transsexual to get totally confused about, I'm a boy, I'm a blah, 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 which is what happens. They end up in the new gay man cult, and they get predated on by the new gay man, and they just have their lives destroyed. That's what happens to them. So you need to be very careful as a parent that you allow the child to advance at their own pace and in conformity with their own feelings. And if the child says, look, I want to read a certain kind of book, I mean, I don't know any girls' books, my kids are all grown up, but if your boy kid's wanting to read typical girl literature or play with typical girl toys, don't stop that. Do not interfere. Because if you do that, the child is going to go, in the first place, it's going to start mistrusting you. It's going to say that I can't be who I am in front of my parents. And trust me, that is absolutely the last thing you want. You definitely don't want that. That's disastrous for your relationship with your child. You need your child to trust you. You really do, because if the child doesn't trust the parents, they will not be honest with the parents, and thereby, I mean, that is a route to hell and gone. It really is. So you mustn't, all these things that people like Zucker used to suggest, take away the Barbies, take away those books and give them these books, and or don't let him watch the Little Mermaid. Make him sure he watches something that's masculine. Blah blah blah. Don't let him play girl games. And okay, I don't care, feminists, if you get shirty about me calling them girl games, because really I don't care what you think. Let him do it. Just, if he wants to wear a dress, let her wear a dress. Do it. And just keep the pressure off. Be really chill and cool. Don't push, don't resist. Just love the child. Show the child that you love that child. And that you don't really mind what that child grows up to be, as long as that child grows up to be happy. That's all you need to do. That's your role. That's, as a parent, that's your only role. Your role is not to shape your child into what other people, think you should shape that child into. Your role as a parent is just to make sure your child grows up happy. So I'm going to draw this one to a close now. But I'll be doing more on this question of childhood transition or pre-transition, pre-transsexual behaviour, shall we call it, because it's becoming extremely important. And unfortunately, there are three groups. There are basically the antis, there are the pros, and there are the wait and sees, and that's me. And my own view is that both the antis and the pros, although sometimes well-meaning, are completely wrong. They're causing more harm than good, significantly more harm than good. And they need to be called out and brought down. And I think this has become even more the case recently because of the activities of autogynephiles, adult autogynephiles, who claim transsexuals to be part of their group, and they're not. There's no relationship between a transsexual and an autogynephile. They're totally different things. There's no similarity between them. They're not the same. And unfortunately, when autogynephiles do things like insisting on using women's toilets and things like that, it's often the transsexuals who get the damage, because autogynephiles are so strident and so aggressive, because they're not agreeable at all. Whereas transsexuals are totally agreeable, and they'll go, oh, you mean I have to use a men's toilet? They won't go. They'll wait till they get home. And it's really abusive. Anyway, I'm going to stop now there because my neighbour's dog is getting excited. See you later.